overhead improvements on that intersection in relation to improvements related to this project. Part of that might be the Highway 42 study. We expect will influence how that intersection gets configured as well. So we weren't anticipating that this development would contribute to those safety improvements.
Director Zakar, I'm wondering if you know, there's a reference in the public comment to a new crosswalk that was recently added, I think right at Pine and East Street. Do you know anything about that, if that's created?
I don't think it's a crosswalk, it's cross-hatching. That is a big area
Oh, to keep people
across
out of
there. Yeah.
Don't
Don't block the intersection.
Yeah.
I'm not real familiar with that. I do know that's out there. You know, it's for business access in and out, you know, because that does back up during peak hour for that private driveway to be blocked. So I think that, you know, this project, I don't think has vehicular access directly at that location, and they can go south to get in and out and avoid that intersection as well, which I would anticipate, you know, that might be the way the residents actually go, especially during peak hour. It might be easier to get out to go to the south.
Well, I'm not concerned about a level of service B. I find that to be acceptable. And I understand that this intersection
Keith, do you have a flannel on? Oh, he's wearing a t-shirt, looks like. Yeah, so you're in good company. All right.
Did not get the memo either.
All right, good evening.
Recording in progress.
Today,
That's not a t-shirt.
do what?
I don't have a t-shirt on.
Oh, do you have a flannel on?
No.
Oh, we're all wearing flannels except for Chrissy, and we were trying to see if
Okay.
you had a flannel.
No, I
or-
had a flannel. I could have worn it.
Yeah. All right. Tonight is Monday, October 16th, 2023. This is Historic Preservation Commission, and we'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson. Sorry.
Yes, here.
Commissioner Bocab.
Yes.
Commissioner Dahlia.
Here.
Commissioner Berg.
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap.
Here.
Commissioner Keller.
Here.
Chair Haley.
Here. And our approval for our agenda this evening. If there's no changes, someone can move to approve.
I'd like to add a request to do a brief recap of the request for conservation easement for 601 Lincoln, which had been before us in 2020 and is now before the city council tomorrow. So maybe we could do a brief recap of that, because it was confusing at the time, if you recall.
I can give you an update at the end of the meeting. We can't have a discussion about it. So you can ask questions, but we can't discuss the actual property. Even though you've already ruled on it, just because it's still an open case.
No discussion? What do you mean? You can discuss where it's at, but
I can share
can't
with
bring
you,
it up?
yeah, exactly. I can share
there
with
was-
you what happened and then what it's happening tomorrow
okay.
night.
It was controversial at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It came up really quickly. Well, I'm discussing it now, and I probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So would I need to go to the city council tomorrow to bring that up?
So if you want to give any feedback as a commissioner or as a resident, then yes, council would be the
Okay.
best place to do that. We can also talk at the end of the meeting, you and I, Gary. Happy to discuss more, but I am more than happy to provide an update at the end, but it just
Yeah.
can't become an item for discussion.
It was before you were here and before everybody but Linda and me. So it was, it's tough to see it come up now. It's not that I disagree with it. It's just that the process wasn't very good.
So do you want to add,
Would you like an update tonight, or do you want
Yeah,
to?
we'll have an update, but I'll probably go to the council meeting tomorrow.
Okay,
Okay.
so we can add that to the
we'll do
agenda.
that to the items from staff, updates from commissioners. Okay. All right, anything else to add or change? If not, we can make a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And are there any public comments that are not, of items that are not on our agenda tonight? And none in the, do we have any public on the online? All right. Then we have public hearings tonight. Our first one is 829 Lincoln, and we'll have a staff presentation.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Let me get this going. Okay, so for 829 Lincoln Avenue, we have a landmark alteration certificate and a grant request. Just to get right into it, the conditions over time, so there's a photo from the 1920s on the left, and then a recent photo from this year on the right. Just to note, over time, the siding, the porch ornamentation has changed. The first floor window size and shape, which you can kind of clearly see here, both on the side elevations and also on the front elevation, have changed. And then also a number of the different materials on the outside have changed as well. So in terms of landmark criteria, just to give a summary, the age meets our 50 years or older criteria. The architectural significance, so there was previously folk Victorian ornamentation. Some remains, or rather the restoration project that's a part of this whole request would restore some of it. There's folk Victorian ornamentation on what's effectively sort of a vernacular wood frame basic home. We've seen a number of these exact sort of configurations in Louisville, and they definitely relate to the social significance of, longtime single-family ownership, mining connection, Italian history. A particular interest in this one is its relationship to Prohibition and the saloon history as well, financing-wise for the city. And then in terms of physical integrity, the form remains with little or no change, except for the exterior elements that I noted previously. So the alteration certificate would affect the siding, the porch trim, and then the window design. So the porch restoration you can see in this photo, and I'll just toggle back quickly here to this picture. See, the idea is to bring it back almost completely to its original design. And then there's also a proposal to add a railing. So you can see there's an existing railing there. The applicant wants to add another railing for safety. The proposal here in this alteration certificate, in this design, shows sort of like a folk Victorian look, but the actual proposal is what's inset in the picture, just to differentiate the railing so it doesn't look like it's historic. There's also a request to update the window design. This would not be necessarily to the historic windows because the applicant doesn't want to change all of the shapes of the windows. They're interior changes. They kind of followed those, from tall to sort of wider and shorter. And so she's not proposing to update them completely, but is proposing to add a new design to them and sort of upgrade them because they're sort of falling apart, sort of a later 20th century remodel. So then in terms of the grant criteria, all of the requested work is identified in the HSA. It all relates to historic preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation. In this case, rehabilitation for the window replacement, and then restoration of the front porch. And then this does meet our grant maximum of coming in under $40,000. So the total is $25,168.50. So with that, staff is recommending approval of all 3 resolutions. That would be Resolution 8 pertaining to the landmark, Resolution 9 pertaining to the alteration certificate, and Resolution 10 pertaining to the grant request. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
I'd have a question. Well, maybe it's better in the discussion that we have. Well, I was going to ask, the estimate of labor for work on that porch was $2,000. And the applicant said it was difficult to find somebody to do that, to take on a small project. I guess having looked at projects recently, $2,000 is very conservative. If it were to exceed that, is that easily doable with the grant request? If it came in at $4,000?
So if the total cost came in at greater than half, right? So she went over her grant request, she'd have to come back through a full hearing like this. Also, you do have it within your purview to change the grant amount. So sometimes you'll suggest something less, but you can also suggest something more. So if you come to a conclusion tonight that you should adjust that amount or ask for another estimate between now and city council that more accurately captured what you think the labor cost would be, that's something that we could certainly talk about.
Well, some of the other requests we've seen ask for a contingency, knowing that it's likely to differ. And anyway, I thought this is very conservative.
Well, and if it came back at 4,000, then her matching would be 2,000, so then she'd still, but maybe I guess it's, yeah. It
Her
would just be,
request now
right,
is
I
for
get you.
2,050, and
Yeah.
that seems like
Low, yeah.
low. I recently got my deck refinished, and it was $3,500. Anyway.
The 10% contingency is also something that the HPC has used in the past that you could consider adding part of your recommendation.
Thanks.
Amelia, can you talk a little bit about what the commission has done historically for window replacement projects? Because I sort of look at this and say, if the porch wasn't there and the windows are not historic, it's sort of a window upgrade program on an old home. And I get that it may fall within the guidelines of our grant program. I just wonder what historically we have done and how we feel about using the collective taxpayers' pool of money to pay for a window upgrade program.
Absolutely, that's a great question. So there are lots of different types of window work that has and has not been covered by the HPC. I think recently we've seen more that are actual window restoration projects. So taking either something that's historic and upgrading it, right, which would I think probably be a little more straightforward, or taking something that's not historic and turning it completely back to, say, what it looked like in the 1948 assessor's card. So those are 2 clear cases I think that the HPC has approved recently. In this case, this would fall under something that I believe the HPC has also approved in the past, but again, it doesn't mean you'd have to tonight. But it's a type of request where this is an older home that was updated, and I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but it's sometime between the 60s and the 80s. And that's something that happens on a lot of these homes that are about 100 or over 100 years old. And so it's because of the fact that they're older that they got sort of this, trying to use a generous word, but sort of a little bit of sketchy upgrades, and sort of that deteriorated or have deteriorated by this point. And so that's, I think, the logic there is that a new build or some type of more recent build wouldn't have the same restoration work that would be needed from a home that has been redone, even though this project specifically isn't a restoration project. So that's, I think, the argument that you could make, but of course it's up to you. And you could, of course, recommend to her that she get more money, ask for more money, and do a full restoration project, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in some of the other commissioners' thoughts, but if it actually were in conjunction with a more robust renovation to upgrade the facility, the house, the physical house, I probably would feel very differently about it. But it seems to fall within guidelines, but I'm just curious what other commissioners think about that.
Are there any images where we can back up to see the historic structure versus where it sits now? I just,
Yes, let me switch over.
sorry, with the 365 pages, might be overwhelmed with what was in there. I think one of the things I notice from something like this and the 2023 versus the 1920s version is the proportions of the windows definitely are lacking, the kind of, I don't know, history that it had. And so I can understand where your comment came from. What we can say about that, I don't know, but it would be, if they were taller and the headers were higher, I think I would definitely feel better about something of that sort where it seems like it fit in, even if it was wider. Just the, again, proportions are concerning to me.
Amelia, can you remind us what the, maybe some of the architects here know, what the siding that's on there right now that was put on in the 50s, what material that is? It said in the packet, but I couldn't locate it again.
I don't remember, I had to look it up.
I know it was maybe concrete with asbestos or something like that. Yeah, okay. Okay. Looks again, kind of just in the line of this, and maybe this is better for discussion, but you know, that is not part of the work being asked for here, so that siding would remain. And I imagine that if window sizes were to shape, that would impact the siding, and siding would have to come off, things like that. So
There'd be other mitigation items that
Yeah.
would come up. So I can understand that, and I don't really know where we are able to sit with everything, but I do understand the question being brought up, and I appreciate it being brought up, and I'm just voicing my opinion of what I see within the two.
Any other staff-specific questions?
No.
And I don't think the applicant is here, though we should check online.
The picture from
No.
1948, the window size looks, or shape looks similar.
Similar to current, or it's similar to the original?
Seems, just offhand, that's a page 14, well, 47 of the whole packet. Anyway.
And I believe I recall that again, when we look at the 50-year criteria for landmarking, I remember that this packet noted, you know, the siding, for example, and then maybe even the windows. If those were upgrades done 47, 52 or so, I mean, they're within 50 years, you know, which is what our criteria is for landmarking. However, this property, the work being done is bringing it back to the full Victorian. So you've kind of got competing eras there, if that makes sense.
So before we move to discussion, are there any public comments for this property? All right, so we'll bring it back for discussion with the commission.
I was hoping to ask the applicant a question regarding the guardrail on the front porch, and whether or not it was for aesthetics or code-related. It's hard to tell exactly how far above grade the porch is and whether or not a guardrail is required. If not, I would prefer not to see it. More like the original.
Yeah, I agree with that, but it is reversible like easily reversible, so that's, could go either way for me.
I will say that at least for me, the material is, or the shape and profile is not of the same time frame, so you can obviously find that it's not from that same setup. Again, the windows and their proportion would be more of a concern to me than that.
So the other thing about the windows, I was thinking, because you bring up a good point as far as, you know, what is our role in just replacing windows? And so if we were to pay to have these replaced, and then in the future, someone comes and says, like, we're gonna take it back to the original, like, shape and everything, it could be a little wasteful. Like, we wouldn't pay for it again, but potentially, I don't know. So I think there is some merit in, do we replace the windows when they're not going back to a period of significance, or do we have a period of significance, or do we say like the 50s when all these changes happened, if that's enough?
Is this?
Right, are we,
Yeah, I think that's the question for
That's
me.
the
Is this
question.
the new period of significance,
Right.
these current windows, or are these current windows, and I don't know the answer, when these windows were put in and changed the shape of the original windows?
I think the period of significance here is, you know, when you look at the criteria for landmark designation, it is referencing that folk Victorian era, which is what the railings are being brought back to. So I think that is, correct me if I'm wrong, Amelia, but that's the period of significance.
But 50 years old for these windows?
Right, but
Correct.
the folk Victorian is more the
Oh.
original, the time the house was built, so 100 and, you know,
Yeah.
100 and whatever years ago.
I understand they've been there for a significant amount of time, and it might be over the 50 years, but I would not say that would be the portion that I would pin it to.
Yeah.
And again, just because they're there, it's more of a ranch house style of the window and everything else, trying to get more bang for your buck on the width versus the proportion that's on the front of the facade. So what I see is the proportion of the rectangle that's up front versus the window and their relationship versus the other one that just seems like it is of a different period.
We have three different requests here: the landmarking, and then the alteration certificate and the grant request. And if we read the packet through, it's written, you know, it meets a lot of the criteria for landmarking. But my kind of just more of a question here, which maybe I should have posed before, is if we were to not approve the alteration certificate and the grant request, and the railings and porch area were not brought back to this folk Victorian look, would it still meet that landmark designation with the other factors? Right, so like when we rule on these, right, we have to rule on them separately.
right,
I'm not sure which order we have to go in.
usually it's landmarking
Usually it's landmarking
right.
first. So but if landmarking, but then that would be without those railings, right? Because we're ruling on landmarking, not sure what's happening with that, if that makes sense.
Right, a landmark would be on the existing, like, right,
Exactly, the existing.
right.
So just something to think about as we, think about the order we have to rule in here. So if we were to rule that it's landmarked without this, we can move forward with these items, for the porch at least. But if we were to rule it's not landmarked, then we would still have to decide whether or not to move forward with these things and what to require, not to require.
One question I have is if we go in the order they're written in, landmark, alteration certificate, and grant request, I mean, it seems like they're all somewhat tied together, so are they the applicant able to back out of any portion of the request if every piece wasn't met that they were looking for as well? Because I don't want to pin anybody into anything else.
Right, so once, if we were to landmark it tonight, it would still have, like, city council still has to sign off on it, and the applicant could pull the application at any point before that happens. Yeah, so,
For clarification.
right, so they still have a choice even after our meeting tonight.
Just to Chrissy's point, or just so I can clarify it, if I understand it correctly, but is your point, if we would landmark this building, we might be limited to what we could do about the railing and the windows if we did that first? Or is your point, we would do the railings and the windows and then landmark it? Would it still be a landmarkable property because we've done the railings and the windows?
I think more, right, sort of more so, if we were to just allow the windows to just kind of like a rehab, not a rehab, just kind of put in the windows that the applicant's asking for now, which are not restoration, or not historic, which would keep the siding in place. But we were to then landmark it, we know that we'd agree then, I'm assuming, to the railing work. What does that mean? Like, does it fit the eligibility for landmarking in that case with the windows and siding like that? It has a lot of the other eligibility, but does it fit that eligibility? Because it is sort of competing eras. Like at first glance, it will have this folk Victorian railing, but other than that, it has other things like location and the neighborhood, the complementary structures, and it's just an interesting one because it is sort of doing some work to bring it more historic and not other.
I just want to add, because I kind of went through this quickly, in case somebody missed it. The social significance also includes the fact that this has been, the owner is the same family that's owned it for over 75 years, who's bringing these requests forward as well. So just because I know that's been a talking point of HPC in the past.
I'd like to clarify maybe about the windows, because there are several eras here. The earliest windows look like there are 2 double-hung windows, but they're all kind of dark. The drawing proposed most currently is, again, 2 double-hung windows. And the middle period of the 50s and 60s is a single, what do they call it, picture window. Is that the way everybody sees that? So it is restoring it back to that original era. The big difference is the railing.
Well, it's not the
Posts
same
are even-
shape or size of the window. Then it's not the same shape or size, like the window opening has been changed?
Does
On
it
the-
look there?
So like the window style looks more historic, right, with the double hungs and the triple panes on the top. But I think what they're saying is this one was, like, these are more
This
long.
one-
Yeah,
this
the
one is-
new proposed
okay.
ones aren't
The
the
one
same.
on the porch looks the same. The ones on the extension to the right are definitely not the same. Yeah, that's true.
So it's a different size and shape of the opening. So that's what's kind of confusing is they've changed the shape to more of a 50s, like Chrissy said, picture window shape, but then they're putting double hung back into that same shape, which is just kind of historically confusing.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. From the architect's drawing here, I guess it's not quite as tall.
Right.
I think Gary's trying to say as well, though, that the one that's under the porch, like in the original photos, might be more the same size to the new one proposed. It's hard to tell because it's in shadows. So it might be just
This one right here
this one right here might be more
still
the,
looks pretty long, but yeah,
but
right?
The upper one, I guess, upper story is the same too.
the upper looks the same. Yeah, so that's good.
And I think staff said too, changing the shape would kind of cause issues with the interior design. I think that was part of your presentation.
Right, so unfortunately, the applicant isn't here, so
Right.
I can't fully represent that part of it, right? But my understanding from my discussions with them, that's a piece of it, that the interior of the house, I don't know that it's a structural piece, but just sort of, she has designed it, they've designed it as, with the windows that have been in place for over 50 years.
Right.
And then the second piece of it is a cost element. Again, I don't have any direct information. She would be better to testify to it. But, my understanding from speaking to her a number of times is to restore the windows to original shape would trigger to restore the siding, would trigger a much larger project. She'd like to update the windows in some form from what they are today. And this is that proposal that doesn't trigger what would effectively be a much higher cost for her, even if the HBC did cover half of it, right? So again, it's tricky because I wish that she were here to represent as much as she could, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, the applicant did note that the windows are going to be wood windows, which is more historic, and have the style elements.
I believe they are a clad wood window, if I remember looking through this one. So at least they would have a little bit more of a longevity than a wood window on the exterior and the interior, which requires constant maintenance and binding and everything else.
So I guess we've obviously landmarked homes that have been changed with siding and window shape and that sort of thing before. So I think this goes back to your point is like, as this house exists today, would we think that this would be eligible for landmarking? Would be one of my first questions. And I personally would say, especially with the 75 years of ownership of the same family, like changing materials and styles through the decades is definitely part of Louisville's history. So I would say that it would be eligible based on age and the overall shape of the house, that kind of thing, has maintained its shape, his integrity. So I guess I don't see the siding and the window shape and size as making it ineligible, in my opinion. And then I think as far as the alteration certificate, I would almost be more inclined to ask, like, for the window, if we still have the siding that's more of the 50s or 60s, would we rather just have a window that reflects that period instead of that double hung? Like, I would almost lean more towards, like, not going back to the Victorian style with the windows. Would almost be my thought. I don't know. Because it just seems it just kind of adds like one more layer of confusion with, and I don't know what to do about the porch either, but the windows, I just wonder if that would be a better solution, but architects might have better. Does that make sense of just having the wide cement?
Well, I'll let you speak.
But
Could you just remind me again, do we need to look at all factors to landmark it? Does it need to
No,
meet
so-
each?
So each one's separate. I mean, I guess they could have a window alteration without being landmarked. So they could come back and say, we just want to, I guess it would still come to us. Anyway, the landmarking is really the first thing before. Isn't that right, Amelia? Because they could still change the windows. If it's not landmarked, they could still change them if they wanted to.
Right, so you need to be thinking about landmarking it as it is.
Right.
And does it have that,
Right.
you know,
Standalone as it is today.
exactly. And then since it seems like the mixing and matching of historical styles is an issue, you know, that's something that you could take up separately after discussing whether this is a landmarkable property. Again, referencing the social significance, just a reminder that's a part of the piece too, the form, location, and all of that. And then certainly, I think the alteration certificate and the grant together are those
Right.
couple more naturally.
Right. So for tonight, the landmark would be kind of the priority and the first thing that we would want to get addressed. And then we would talk about the alteration certificate and if the applicant doesn't